2025 was the year of reading, unprecedented for me. I read 101 books. Only four of them were 5 stars for me. The rest of them fell across the rest of the spectrum. But there were about 11 4.5 star books, so books that were really, really good. So we're going to talk about the top 10 books that I read in 2025. Now, these are not books that necessarily came out in 2025, but books that I have read during the year of 2025. So since it's the top 10 list, it wouldn't be the same without some honorable mentions. So the first honorable mention is a very popular book by Dan Brown. It has over 3 million ratings, and it's called Angels and Demons. And this is the first installment in the Robert Langdon series. And Robert Langdon is a college professor who is focused on religious iconography and symbology. And he's engaged in an adventure that takes him all across Rome in search of Illuminati sites. The premise of this novel revolves around a theft of antimatter that could have explosive consequences. And so there's a bomb, and they're trying to figure out where the bomb is, how to dismantle the bomb, and basically save the world. I've previously read this book before, and the first time I read it, I didn't think it was as good. But upon a reread, I thought that it was a lot more interesting than I gave it credit for the first time. The next honorable mention is a Stephen King book that a lot of people put in their top 3. It's 11/22/63 by Stephen King. It has about 650,000 ratings and an average rating of 4.35, so pretty highly rated. It asks the question of what if. So what happened, the plot revolves around going back in time and trying to stop the JFK assassination. Jake finds himself a portal that goes back to 1958, and the premise is that each time that he goes back in time, he reverts everything that he did before. So he has to go back in time, live during that period of time, and try and stop the JFK assassination. The book basically asks questions about, is it valuable to try and change the past, or is there something that changing the past will have unintended consequences? I think the reason that I rated this book so highly is, even though the story itself was interesting and engaging, there's a romantic aspect to this novel that made the climax of the book very powerful. And while this isn't what I would classify as a classic Stephen King novel, it was an exceptional adventure. And I think this is a book where undoubtedly Stephen King excels in the way that he nails the conclusion. I think a lot of people agree that the conclusion here is one of the best aspects of this book. The next honorable mention is actually a book that I rated 5 stars. And I'll explain why it's not in the top 10, even though I gave it one of the highest ratings of the year. This book was Beartown by Frederick Bachman. It's a very complicated and difficult to read novel. The story centers around a hockey-obsessed town located in the wilderness, and the book starts off by introducing us to all the various characters that are key to the plot. Here you find characters that you like, characters that you root for, characters that you don't like, characters that you root against, but they're all very complex characters. And even the straightforward characters can surprise you at times. Here, there is a trigger warning for rape. It plays a key part in the novel. And kind of the consequences that come with this event and how it shakes up the town, and nobody is left the same. I gave it 5 stars because it really was capable of provoking an emotional response. I felt very strongly about the themes in this book, but reading it was difficult. It was uncomfortable, and I didn't enjoy the process of reading the book all that much. Um, but I do think that Frederick Bachman really wrote an exceptional book here that tackles difficult themes, and is able to provoke a strong emotional response from the reader. So for that reason, I gave it 5 stars, but it's not a book that I actually enjoyed reading. The next honorable mention is an older book by Daphne du Maurier, and this one is Jamaica Inn. It's a story about a young woman who is thrust into an unpleasant scenario after her mother passes away. She finds herself living with her aunt and her aunt's husband in a dilapidated inn that's known as being fearsome across neighboring towns. This story is filled with intrigue, mystery, even a little bit of romance, and it has everything in it that makes it an engaging story. The plot thickens, and so it's continually interesting to read, and the protagonist finds herself at the heart of a diabolical inn and attempts to figure out how to bring those responsible for crimes to justice while protecting her aunt. Overall, the story fired on all cylinders, and it was engaging throughout the entire experience, so I gave it 4.5 stars. Now we come to the top 10. Number 10 is also a classic mystery novel. This one is Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. I gave this one 4.5 stars, and I think this one is definitely a classic for a reason. Anthony Horowitz, another mystery writer, mentioned that the detective novel is often appreciated best after the curtain closes and the entire novel can be viewed as a completed adventure. And I think this book, Death on the Nile, really stands as an example to that. The way that Christie unravels the ending is what makes it a standout book, in my opinion, compared to other Poirot stories. Without spoilers, it's a unique and interesting way to explain the adventure that awaits Poirot upon the Nile. And the fact that it has one of the more interesting resolutions makes it a top-rated book, in my opinion. Number 9 is Streets of Laredo by Larry McMurtry. This is the second book, the sequel to Lonesome Dove, which is a fantastic book in its own right. Streets of Laredo is a continuation of that epic, Lonesome Dove. Lonesome Dove was an excellent character investigation into the meaning of friendship between two unlikely individuals, and Streets of Laredo continues the adventures of Woodrow Call as he embarks on a mission for the railroad to stop a train robber named Joey. And along on the adventure are some returning characters. And if Lonesome Dove was a character study into friendship, the second novel feels like an exploration of a mother's love for her children. So Joey, the famous train robber, is still the loved son of Maria, his mother. And Maria's unflinching love for her children shines throughout the novel, as Joey repeatedly acts in harmful and offensive ways towards the family. Maria continues to attempt to reclaim her son's love and affection, and in a heartbreaking fashion, she can't come to terms with the rebellious and villainous life that he has undertaken. And because of this, Streets of Laredo is an interesting, touching, and thought-provoking character study from an expert character writer. Here, while Lonesome Dove is more grand and epic in scale and magnitude, what McMurtry is able to achieve in a novel of approximately half the length of Lonesome Dove is nothing short of remarkable. And this book, again, not quite as popular as Lonesome Dove, but definitely worth a read. Give it 4.5 stars. Then the 8th best book of the year is a book that only has 556 ratings on Goodreads. And it is the latest book from Abir Mukherjee, and it's called The Burning Grounds. It's the 6th installment in the Sam Wyndham series. And what takes place in this story is a continuation of these two characters that live under Imperial India in the 1920s. Um, Sam Wyndham is a British policeman, and he finds himself in these interesting circumstances where he is trying to come to terms with who he is in society and how the British have oppressed the natives in the Indian subcontinent. So the plot here is that Wyndham stumbles upon a rich and affluent Indian that's deposited in the cremation district in Calcutta. That might not seem surprising, as that's typically what happens. However, this particular corpse has his throne slit, meaning that somebody caused his particular end. So Sam Wyndham, with his assistant and friend Surin, who has returned from his European adventure at the end of the last installment, they find themselves thrown in the midst of a charming actress who has come to India on the murdered man's invitation to film his magnum opus. And I think this book is one of the better installments in the Sam Wyndham series. I think that in order to really appreciate what's going on here and the complex character interactions, it's essential to read the prior books first. I think this is one of his most successful novels because of the way that the characters interact with each other, the tension, the way that the events of previous books play a major role in the way that the characters interact. And I think that he has successfully used previous entries to impart nuance and important character development in this particular novel. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I don't think there's anything that Abir could have done differently or could have done more successfully in this novel. I just felt like it didn't have a special, unique quality that would make it a 5-star read. The seventh best book that I read is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is a really famous book. It's hard for me to categorize it into a specific genre. It kind of created its own genre of dark academia. But Goodreads classifies it as a classic mystery. I think it also has elements of contemporary and thriller in the book, and it's all of these things and yet none of these at the same time. It's a book that's divided into 2 parts, and I found that kind of interesting because the climax that I was anticipating happened at the end of the first half of the book, and the second half of the book talks about how the events that happened influence characters and their decisions and their mindset and how they are transformed by what happened in the first part of the book. So in some ways it reminds me of Crime and Punishment, where Raskolnikov is left alone brooding with his thoughts after committing his crime. In this book, due to the fact that there are multiple people involved in the crime, the descent into madness takes place more as interactions between characters rather than within the protagonist's head. And I found this book to be exciting, well written, made me feel intelligent with its clever references to other literary works, and was engaging throughout. The 6th best book of the year is also a 4.5-star book. It's The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman. This is a mystery novel, and it's part of the Thursday Murder Club series. While reading previous installments is not required to enjoy this novel, it does add a level of dimensionality to the characters that would be lost otherwise. In this book, Elizabeth and her crew are tasked with recovering a shipment of heroin that led to the murder of one of Stephen's friends, who had helped them in a previous investigation. Tight plotting, intriguing character development, and witty comical banter is typical for these Thursday Murder Club series, and it's on full display here. While other installments have balanced the inevitability of death and the desire to live to the fullest, this installment missed a bit of that mark for me, and it dives a little bit more into the sad territory. And so I took off some points for that. But overall, I've grown to love these characters. I feel a little bit less uplifted with this particular book rather than some of the other ones, but it's still a wonderful book, comical, heartwarming, and occasionally gut-wrenching at times. But the feels, this book has all of them. The fifth best book of the year that I read, top five, is The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson. This is a pretty popular book with about 1 million ratings on Goodreads, and it's the second installment in the Millennium Trilogy by Stieg Larsson. The same warnings that applied to the first book apply to this book. It's dark, gritty, and at times disturbing. It contains the same protagonists as the first book, but it layers a more complex backstory on top of the first novel's success. While it's a darker and more layered story than the first novel, it's still extremely readable. The novel catches your attention and holds it throughout the entire length of the novel. I think the second installment is even more interesting and engaging than the first novel, which is saying something given how engrossing that first book was. I don't see how the third novel could exceed the magnitude depicted here, but I'm looking forward to reading the final installment and see which one is the pinnacle of the series. The fourth best book that I read in 2025 was The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. This tells the story of Theodore Decker, a young boy from a very young age all the way through his adult life. This novel is often labeled as Dickensian, which refers to in the style of Charles Dickens. I'm not sure why it is. I try to understand that a little bit better while I was trying to read the story. As best as I can articulate, it tells the story of a young boy coming to maturity in the nature of something like David Copperfield, and it contains elements of poverty as well as social commentary. So the novel follows the story of Theo after an unexpected event leaves him at the mercy of others following the death of his mother. He is enthralled into a life that he doesn't anticipate and is irrevocably changed by the events. He soon makes new friends, losing the connections to certain others that were previously his friends, and attempts to deal with his newfound grief in interesting ways. The story and the manner of telling the story were both enthralling. Theo himself is a flawed character, and because of this, it's interesting to follow his adventure. He's definitely not the ideal protagonist. He makes decisions that are not for the best, but they keep the story unpredictable and unexpected throughout its length. While I thought that Tartt did an excellent job telling an engaging and enthralling story, there were parts of this book that I felt were oddly jarring compared to the rest of the novel. About 20% of the novel, the last 20%, everything seems to go off the rails, and that made it difficult for me to give this a 5-star rating. I think that up to that point, the book was absolutely amazing, but the last 20% was kind of jarring compared to the first 80%. Despite this, Tartt does an excellent job of painting Theo as a product of his environment and to help explain his actions that he takes. This book took nearly a decade to write for Tartt, and it's an excellent piece of literature. It was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, and it's exciting, complex, and interesting. It's definitely worth the price of admission, and while it's completely different from her other book, The Secret History, this book was as engaging or even maybe more interesting than that well-received book. So, The Goldfinch, definitely a book I would recommend. Donna Tartt, she's on this list twice for a reason. The number 3 best book of the year goes to Stephen King. The Stand by Stephen King. Many people consider this to be their number one Stephen King novel. It's a very, very long book at 1,152 pages and nearly 500,000 words. But this behemoth is definitely worth taking the time to read. King describes a apocalyptic scenario where 99% of the world's population dies due to the super flu. And the story is told taking place across multiple protagonists across all of America as they try to cope with the aftermath of the super flu. It's grand in scope, grand in ambition, and he pulls out a tour de force in this epic, making it one of the most engrossing reads. Throughout the novel, you root for and against characters, and you're thoroughly invested in the lives and the outcomes that affect these characters. He merges post-apocalyptic themes with dark fantasy elements, and the story comes together pretty cohesively and well told in the narrative. It's difficult to do across this many pages, but King manages to keep the reader engaged and interested throughout the journey. It's definitely a testament to King's ability to tell an amazing story, and it has received a lot of critical acclaim since its re-release in the expanded form in the 90s. Overall, he paints here an interesting, engaging, and exciting story, and he tells multiple plot lines and story arcs that come together in a unique and often unexpected ways. Furthermore, he accomplishes this in a very long, still tightly told story that kept me reading all the way through. So this book, The Stand, got 5 stars. The second best book that I read this year is arguably tied with number 1. But this one also got 5 stars for me, and it's Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. On the surface, this is the story about building a cathedral. Sounds pretty boring, but Ken Follett is able to turn this story about building a church and highlighting the lives of the people it touches, turns it into more than just building a cathedral. The story is more than meets the eye. It has a wide plethora of characters and events that are depicted in this massive epic. It's touching, endearing, heartwarming, happy at times, gut-wrenching, nauseating, disturbing, and depressing at others. This story touches upon a number of different facets and is vastly complex at times. Here, Follett made me laugh, cry, and cringe at different points of telling his epic. And while I don't think the story itself is a perfect book, it's a massive achievement in storytelling. There were parts of this book that were difficult to read and uncomfortable, but it always kept me interested and invested. There were characters that I loved, characters that I despised and was rooting for their downfall, but Follett's ability to make me care about all of them was wonderful. Throughout the nearly 1,000 pages of this book, I could not put it down. Usually when I read something of this length, I get detached and it gets hard to finish, but this book was engaging throughout the entire experience. And while this book should come with a heap of warnings and trigger warnings, and giving it anything less than 5 stars would feel disingenuous. So it got that 5-star rating. And the other number 1 book that I read this year was the first book that I read of the year, and it remained top of the list. And that book was East of Eden by John Steinbeck. It's an epic adventure that spans only 600 pages, and I say only because once you finish, you wish there was more. Steinbeck says that he's been practicing his entire life to write this novel, and it definitely shows. On the surface, the story is based around 2 families and their interactions with each other, based in Salinas in California, and he weaves together touching and infuriating characters, interesting dilemmas, and unexpected resolutions. Throughout the reading of this book, I had to stop and put it down at times because it was so crazy and engaging and jaw-dropping. It's an absolutely fantastic story that keeps the reader on the edge of their seat. The characters are lovable, interesting, and absolutely lifelike. It's a fantastic story, and it's one that's going to stick in your mind well after reading it. Overall, Steinbeck has a masterclass here in telling a fantastic story that raises a number of interesting points while also feeling grounded and not drifting away from the story just to prove a point. And those were the best books that I read in 2025.